So I guess I should start with the question of, do you think it's possible to excel in our fields while staying true to our values and not having to sacrifice aspects of our faith? I'm going to say yes, it is, because you guys have all succeeded, but please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to have me here today. I do think it's possible, but I think as a Muslim woman, as a woman of colour, I have experienced more challenges than my white counterparts. And as women in general, we are not, we're breaking the glass ceiling. But as women of colour, we have to chip away at the concrete ceiling because we are faced with so many challenges. And, I'm just going to use some statistics here. So 75% of women of colour have experienced racism in the workplace, and 61% have to, change the way that they behave and change themselves in order to fit in. For me, I think my journey as a leader has not been an easy one, because I work for an organisation that champions race equality and really holds organisations and stakeholders to account. And that's not really seen as welcoming by some. So I often find that I'm the lonely voice in the room. But, I'm faced with lots of challenges and barriers. But one thing I haven't done is compromise my values and my beliefs. My biggest drive in life is looking at our Prophet, peace be upon him. He led the Ummah on the values of inclusion and equality, and I think for me, I want to mirror that every day as a CEO for an organisation that works with different ethnic minority communities and really amplifies their voices at a senior level. Because where I'm from, in Bradford, there's a lack of representation of senior leaderships from ethnic minority communities, and I often find that I'm the lonely voice in the room, having to really speak up for ethnic minority communities. So it is difficult, it's not easy, but it's possible. As long as we don't compromise our beliefs and values, I think we can achieve that.
So I was going to say, particularly, let's say in corporate spaces, sometimes we're asked to wine and dine or go into certain spaces which we might not feel comfortable in, particularly as you move up the ladder. Is that something that you've found, and how have you been able to counter that in the spaces that you've come across?
Absolutely. So I work for a science education foundation, because a lot of people don't know what Edinburgh Science is. It's the oldest science festival in the world, and now we undersee science education learning across schools as well as with the science festival environment. Yes, the answer is you will be invited to a lot of fancy dinners in very fancy places. I think some of them, making sure that your requirements are kind of met before you actually turn up. So, halal requirement, don't shy away from that. Sometimes it's easier just to say that you're vegan on that day, just suck it up and have a vegetarian meal and go and have a halal meal somewhere else later. I think also delegation. At this time, the point you get to this point in your career, what you find is that it's as much as about yourself in the position, it's also about the team that you're going to recruit around you. And actually, some people love that stuff. They love going to these fancy dinners and mixing all these people and making loads of connections. Right? If they love doing that, send them. That's the best thing to do. Right? And I think that's certainly the case what I've started to do in this position. I've only been in this position 6 months, so I'm relatively very new. But that's certainly something that I've come across. A lot of evening events being invited to that. And I'm starting to delegate a lot of them.
I mean, it's same question, but I guess also what are your frameworks to support? Because when we're coming up, and especially in senior leadership, when I was growing up, we didn't see many people of colour in senior leadership. We definitely didn't see many Muslims, and we definitely didn't see any Muslim women. So well done, and mashallah. But what are the frameworks that have supported you in that success?
Again, thank you, Nassar, and thank you to the others for inviting me. To add to your point, and I was partly against the point this morning as well, that it is important to acknowledge the challenges that we face, but also that we continue to face, and face since the time when grandparents and parents came into the UK and the discrimination that they faced, and it was much more difficult. When I became a doctor, the gay impact in the UK, like this, there were no. The hospital I was looking at last winter, they were thinking of some consultants, that's the kind of highest grade of hospital doctor. and then some professors, which is of course the most senior academic status, and there were certainly no Muslim CEOs of companies like Future Health. And the generation before that, it was even hard to become a doctor, or to become an academic, or even to get into lower management. So the point is there has been progress, there's still a way to go. What we're seeing for the first time, I think, in the history of Muslims in the UK, is that it is now possible to get right to the top, in our respective sectors, and that just wasn't possible before. So I'm, of course, grateful for the opportunity to have. In terms of my own journey, I guess the kind of statistics would suggest that the chance of getting miraculous is very small. So I came from a financially very challenging situation as a child on free school meals, obviously ethnic minority, religious minority. And so statistically, the chance of getting to become a doctor was pretty much zero. But I was some of the less supported, of course, by my parents, firstly, by the school that I went to, by the university. So I managed to get into Cambridge, and that obviously helped. And when we moved to Oxford, or again, it helped to be in those two institutions. But I didn't have any role models in terms of that I was looking for. They just didn't exist at that time. But of course, we have the best role model from before, which is the Prophet ﷺ, and despite the adversity that he faced, much greater than the we face, you could never even imagine. And the same with many of the companions, etc. So we have many role models from our history that, despite our challenges, they have done great things. We have an opportunity here as well in the UK. The final point I make for the next question is, being a Muslim and being a practicing Muslim is certainly not, in my experience, a barrier to getting where I could to. If anything, I would say it's helped me. I joined the Future Health, which at the time we were relatively small. It's a charity, it's a private company, it's a charity, certified with a chief medical officer. And when the role of CEO became available, I think one of the things that helped me is that the board, which is chaired by a very famous doctor, Sir John Bell, who's a good academic, they could see that the values that I demonstrated in Muslim, and that we demonstrate in Muslim, truthful, honesty, integrity, the way you deal with your colleagues, the way you don't speak about backed by people you don't like, etc. That's not only, I think, hard to be appointed as CEO. That's the largest health research company in the world. We have a research study in the world. It's a relatively large company. And if it was a private company, I'm sure they would billion pounds. So it's that opportunity doesn't come along very often, but I am very grateful for it, and I hope inshallah that others will be able to do even more in the future.
Thank you so much. One of the core values we talked about this morning, and it's actually one of the core values of Muslim Aid, is excellence. And actually, if you do go away and look at these guys' bios, mashallah, they're clearly living that value in their lives, which has allowed them to get to the positions that they're in. Hassan, you said that you're new in the CEO role, not just looking at it as, being Muslim in that space, but what have you found are the core challenges that you faced in that role?
I think one of the things that you're going to come into is that you don't know what you don't know. And a CEO role is like all of companies, and the last book stops with you. People told me before I took the role that the CEO role is very lonely. And that is very true, especially in a workplace. You need to have the ability to be really into the detail, but also kind of out of the detail. There's a difference between working in the business and on the business. And you hire people to work in the business, but you need to work on the business. I think in that capacity, then, I think faith has been a really important space to even find community outside work. Even now in this space, people have been asking me what I do, and I just say I do my best, because I don't like to talk about my work in spaces outside work. But so that is finding a space where you're able to interact outside work, like a social space. That's really important. Giving you a space to know that you don't know yet, and making sure that you don't rush into decisions is really, really crucial, especially when you're coming into an existing business where you're having to look at why things aren't working and why things would be working a certain way. That's been quite important. And I think also acknowledging that your skill set might not be where you want it to be when you first get into the place. For example, people management, especially if you're coming into a team which has got an existing SLT team, you have to acknowledge that actually the way that people may work may not be the way that you need people to be. The existing structures in the organization may not be where the organization is to go. There was something actually the new Manchester United manager said recently, which actually echoed with me quite a lot. He said, if I don't implement my ideas, what am I here for? And it's certainly the case when you come in as the new CEO, you get to a point where you're like, oh, it's going to be a challenge to get my ideas across here. But remember, you have been brought in for your ideas. And if you forget your ideas, what you have for the business, then really you're making yourself quite redundant in that you can change your ideas, but you've got to make sure that your ideas are fit for the business and what the business needs. Stop there.
And just off the back of that, you've been in this role, I think you started it at the beginning of COVID, which is an interesting time to come in, so I'm sure you face a lot of challenges. But what would be your advice to people who are aiming at senior leadership positions and how to build into that?
Yeah, I mean, I started my role at the height of the pandemic as a project manager at the time. That was 4 years ago. And it was a time where everything was moving online. I didn't have a staff team. I was working with one of my other colleagues on an online platform. I just joined the organisation, so for me, it's about getting to know the board members as well as the 26 organisations that we funded and stakeholders like the council, the health and care sector. So that was a challenge in itself. But I just think that you've got to use those transferable skills that you've adopted throughout your career and really have that backing from your board. So I had a really good board that was supporting me, and one of my biggest allies and supporters has been my manager. He's a Muslim man, and I've never had that before. And he was really supportive, and he kind of held my hand to say, right, okay, this is what this is what you need to do and how to do it. So it was brilliant, and that was a challenge in itself, working throughout COVID, because for us it was about making sure that communities had that guidance to stay alive. So it was a challenging role, and then I quickly moved up as the executive director and now the CEO. And it came with a lot of blood, sweat and tears, a lot of sacrifice. I nearly had 2 burnouts because for me, I was doing a job that I loved. I love working with communities. I love empowering communities. But it's really important for me that I had that support from my board, and especially women within my community that were supporting me. And sometimes I found that they have been, people from my own community have been that barrier. So for me, I found that I was very much in a toxic place where it was all about people's individual goals of achieving and, getting into leadership positions. So having to lead an organisation throughout COVID and then, navigating through them challenges was really hard. I nearly had 2 burnouts and breakdowns, and it was really difficult. But I suppose you have to have that support network that is going to keep you going.
Well, thank you so much. Just looking at the time, we've had about 15 minutes. Although I have lots of other questions and I could direct this, I think it's actually just better to take it to the floor, and then I can fill gaps if there aren't any, but they clearly are. So let's start over here.
Start the question I've always in. The scholarly work that is Spider-Man with great power and great power and great responsibility. In your position as head of the great that they have in your personal achievements, how do you, in your capacities, then give back to the community, bring people up, empower people?
So, just, in the role of Future Health, which is different to what I've done previously, which was more in hospital, doctoring and universities, but in all of those roles, there are always opportunities to help people, and not just, our role as Muslims and role as Muslim leaders is to help everybody, not just Muslims, but of course, we want to help those who are most in need and those who are least likely to be able to climb the ladder in the way that we have. So in general, that's what I'm trying to do. I think the other point I would make is that, which I should have said in my initial answer, we don't need to compromise in order to get to these positions. And to the last time I practice, I'm not allowed to go to prayer. I meet with and I have meetings now in government and with what we call the establishment, praying down street in Parliament, etc. It's not that you need to give these things up in order to get to know. It's the advice that I give to younger Muslims is that they shouldn't think that they need to do that. Although there are examples, and not the many, but there are examples of people who haven't obviously compromised and given up these things to get to the positions that are now also going where that hasn't been necessary, so which a lot of people will see that you can be there. The other final point before I hand over is that in these positions that we have, as I say, great responsibility, you are now an ambassador really for Islam Muslims. I have maybe 300 people who work with me directly, and thousands more, as I said, many very senior people in government and industry and civil service. And if you don't act as a Muslim and according to Islamic values yourself, then not only is that reflecting badly on you as an individual, but on our whole community. And I have an opportunity, for example, we have an iftar, for example, we invite all the non-Muslim staff as well to join. And that's an opportunity to tell them and for them to see some of Islam action. Also, when it's time to pray, for example, our Muslim staff, we pray in the room. So these are small things, and of course, again, the main thing is your big character. This is what people will see the most. And we work, or I have worked most of my career, 90% of my career, and most of my whole life with Muslims. But I have seen throughout that time that they appreciate these good qualities that we have, or should have, because most people do have that. They appreciate truth, they appreciate good character. So, although there are, as I said, challenges that we face, additional challenges, ultimately, of course, we're only doing the right thing, and we believe we have Allah on our side as well, and inshallah we'll succeed.
On that question, I think it's important to note that when you see these quote unquote what we call barriers, see them as hurdles. So you can you have this kind of mental ability to feel that you can jump over them. And I think that getting to positions that we are in, it's important probably for us to be able to probably share how we got over those hurdles. Another thing that I noticed in my previous job at the Royal Institution of Great Britain is that being able to offer opportunities to people where they probably may not think they are opportunities. So giving a lecture at the Royal Institution of Great Britain, for example, is something that a lot of science communicators and researchers and scientists and thinkers aspire to do. But many of them come from a particular background. They know of the institution. They either have agents or publishers or are pitching them all the time. And I think that it required an active measure from people like myself, who were programmers there, to actually go, who are the rising stars in the Muslim world for science communication, and approaching them and actively giving them an opportunity to speak in these spaces. And not doing it on the basis that they're Muslim, but actually they're AI experts or they're experts in quantum technology or whatnot. So that's important too. You're giving people opportunities where they may not see they are there too. And so being a pointing of direction, something like that, that's really, really important. Again, I echo what's been said there. So you enter these spaces which in some instances still have not had any Muslim representation at all, ever. You enter some spaces where EDIA papers on the paperwork, it looks fantastic. Yeah. In the practical life of what happens, it's non-existent. And I think that sometimes, simply just being a voice in the room to kind of vocalize a certain thing, it's been quite important to do. One aspect of that which I can share is actually the funding situation that we have with festivals across the cultural sites across the UK right now. Right, funding comes from all sorts of places. And that's been some places where you find, goodness me, some of the festival scene and cultural scene are entrenched in funding where we would actually see very unethical. How do you navigate that space? And I'm still learning how to navigate that space. But one thing that is for certain that I've realized is that if I'm in the room, inshallah, the conversation can't just be washed over. You're going to have that difficult conversation. And people are going to have to bring to light the things that they've tried to just go, it's convenient not to talk about. How that influences the outcome, in this particular world of funding, it's always been a very difficult world to navigate, and one person alone can't solve the entire funding situation of that world. But I do feel that it's important to not allow the conversations just to be kind of shelved as they've been in the past, if you're there. And that, again, that links into the values, and I think that, again, like the Professor just said, people do appreciate that those values are actually human values in many instances. They're not just Muslim values. And so bringing that to the forefront is really important.
Yeah, I'd just like to quickly add to that it's about creating space for people. I work for an organisation that represents 80 grassroots organisations within Bradford who work in the volunteer and community sector. So I amplify their voices at that strategic level. So for me, it's about making space for them and really encouraging them, empowering them, and working with stakeholders like the council and the health and care sector to make sure that any services that are delivered and developed are inclusive to meet the needs of the diverse communities that live and work in the district. And it's also about empowering your team as well. So for me, it's really important that I am an inclusive leader, a motivational leader. I, supported one of my colleagues from my team during COVID. The funding was coming to an end, and she applied for a scholarship to do her Masters in Human Rights. So I completed her application form, encouraged her, and really helped to develop her confidence to say, actually, you can do this, because that came full circle. She went to London, did her Masters in Human Rights, and then just last year we wrote a report around the racial disparities for ethnic minority communities in the UK. She was at the forefront of writing that report because of the skills and knowledge she gained from the Masters, and we both went to Geneva and presented that report to the UN committee, and one of our recommendations was put forward to the UK government, which was to scrap prevent and give reparations to communities that have been impacted. So that came kind of like full circle. So for me, as a leader, it's really important to recognise the value, the skills that your team have, because we rise by lifting others. Somebody gave a chance to me, and I have to give that chance back to my team. And my team really encouraged me. Like last year, they were saying, you've got to get on LinkedIn. I think I created a LinkedIn profile about 2 years ago. And they were like, you have to be on LinkedIn, you have to be visible, you have to be active. And if they hadn't encouraged me, so I think it's a two-way relationship. So you have to take people with you on that journey. It's not just about yourself.
Thank you so much. I would just like to add to that the benefit of a consortium and all the Muslim networks that are part of it is that you can get exposure to these wonderful people, also all these wonderful people that are sitting here that have different experiences and that you can learn from, and hopefully can help you in your areas of work, and so we can lift each other up together, inshallah. I did think there was a sister here who had a question as well.
Alhamdulillah, what a sad stage has been able to break the plastic and get your own teams. Photograph and build the other way. The point of my question is, what specific qualities do you have? So there's about values now. What qualities do you have that you think allow you to break those glass ceilings? And allow you to differentiate yourself from what it is in society?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll be really honest with you. 6 years ago, I didn't think that I'd be sat here. I didn't think that I would be alive, let alone sitting here as a CEO, addressing the Muslim community about my leadership journey. So alhamdulillah, Allah's been really merciful, and I've had that opportunity. One thing that I would say is that the qualities that you need is resilience, and my experiences have really taught me how to be resilient and navigate through the challenges that I faced. Because as a single mother, I came late today because I'm still, a mum. I'm a carer for my mother. So I had to make sure that them two were settled and everything was in order for me to then come here today. But I just think it's about really being resilient and making space for others and lifting people, like I said, and really making sure, because for me, there's days where I just think, that was a really difficult meeting, and my confidence just, it takes a hit because I'm often the lonely voice in the room. But then I just think, no, do you know what? I'm doing this for ethnic minority communities to amplify their voices, to give them opportunities. And if I don't do it, who will? Who will be that representation for them? So we really need to work on representation and really encouraging more people of colour, especially Muslim women, to take on leadership roles. But allowing that opportunity for them as well. So making space for others is a real quality that you need to have as a leader, because it's not always just about you.
I think on this question, I'll break it into 3 parts. One which I think I've probably 2 I'm learning, and 1 I feel like it's there. So the first one is ideation. You need to be able to generate ideas very fast in a workplace and be able to understand your business well enough, and also the sector well enough to understand what ideas will flourish. So I'm in the science communication world, science education world, looking at, for example, what education movement's happening in AI right now, what's happening in quantum, what's happening in climate. How can we be the first movers in that place? How can we develop products fast enough to really excel in that market? The second two, I think, that are needed, and I'm developing them as I come into this role, the ability to problem solve fast within an environment where you are literally employed to solve problems all the time. And it helps if you've got a team that comes with you with solutions or these options. But, you know, for the most part, especially when you come in the first time around, people won't have the confidence to present you with those solutions and the problems. Or they'll present you with the problems, not the solutions. And so being able to really absorb the pressure that comes with that, and then come out with the solutions, not the problems. And then to add to that is the decision making what comes with that. In these roles, the last book stops with you, and that means that you to own all the responsibility. In a previous life, far from being a director of an organisation, I directed a theatre show when I was very young. I was dabbling in a lot of different stuff. And one of the things that I learned from being a director of a theatre show is that sometimes as a director, you ask other people their opinions because you want shared responsibility if it fails. And what you need to learn is actually you're asking people for their opinions because you brought them into that space because they know the thing better than you, and you're going to use that opinion to inform your decision that you're going to take full responsibility for. And I think that is an important skill set to have as a director, is that I'm going to make the decision on based on the information I have today, right now, the best decision I can possibly make. And I'm going to take full responsibility to it, whether that's I'm accountable to the board or the organisation. And that's something where I feel like you have to do, other people in your organisation don't have to have that.
I mean, I think, for me personally, I think this is applicable to all of us, is that even from a very early stage, and it's mainly, I guess, probably came from my mother, was that she said you should always aim high, do your best when I was at school, even if the situation at home is very difficult, there's a lot of things going on, you must do your best. And that was the case at school, or the university, and then and up to that. Don't feel that you're going to be held back because of circumstance. And I think that ambition is important, because if you think it's very simple thing, if you think you can't become a doctor anyway, if you think you can't start, if you think you can't become a CEO, then you won't. You have to at least think that it's possible. So for me personally, that's what's helped me to get through today in my career. I mean, secondly, as we believe, we plan a lot of plans, a lot of vegetables, but it's not. I planned my career always worked out. To be honest, most of what I've done has been because opportunities have been presented to me, and I've applied, and alhamdulillah, I've got it. But those opportunities didn't come about through my own efforts, it's come from a lot of us. And the final point is that you have to, it goes back to the talking about excelling. We heard this right at the beginning this morning as well. Whatever you do, you should excel at that. And a lot of us have different abilities, but whatever ability we have, we do the best with those abilities. And again, for me personally, it's been important to get to the stage because people recognise that you've done well and you've done previously, and that helps you get to the next part. I don't want to underestimate the importance of values and character either, because I think it has to be increased to get the right top. Because there are certain levels you can get to with based more technical excellence or expertise, but to go even higher, I think that the way that you didn't deal with people, your communication skills, taking responsibility, as was mentioned, they're the additional kind of skills which can get you to that next stage.
And I think we have time for, I think we have time for one last question. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for your time. Yes. Part of the passion was doing with us or without showing the workers, so I was just wondering from your experience, like how far do you go? So obviously you're trying to push the ball out so many different things, but senior leadership in order to keep what has tended to change. How far do you go for kind of what you're after showing that conversation?
Sorry, what was that last one?
I don't hear. So what was the question?
I'm not sure.
How do you
Problem.
How far do you go without risking conversation being shut down?
How far do you go without risking the conversation being shut down?
Without you switching the conversation down.
How far do you go with
From
what?
ours.
There's very few investors, very few Muslim investors. I guess the question really is, you've got Hindu people like China, Google's, etc. You've got Rishi Sunak. We've got children in Saudi Arabia who even past that, who are a slightly Muslim. What are these state practices that you think are Hindu as specifically compared to Hindu Christian, for instance?
So I wanted to hear the first question again, because I can't remember it.
So it was then the first question was around shutting the drawbridge behind us.
Okay.
We were saying how far can we push the conversation without risking it being shut down.
Okay.
So in terms of pulling people upwards.
Okay, right.
I just want to address your question. I think what's hindering us is the equality of opportunity, because as Muslims, we're living in a current climate where things are just going to get worse for us, and we need to be realistic about that. We don't have the opportunities, especially if you're a visible Muslim with a hijab or a beard, to lead. To be in that seniorship position without compromising who you are and compromising your faith and belief. I'm just going to give an example. When I went to Geneva, we were in the UN committee, and the UN committee were holding the government to account. And there was a Muslim brother from the Home Office, and the UN rapporteurs said to him, "What do you think the biggest threat to the UK government is at the moment?" And this was just after, a couple of days after the race riots. And the brother kept on saying, these disorders, and the rapporteurs kept on saying, why don't you call it Islamophobia and racism? Call it out for what it is. And he kept on saying disorders. So after that session, I went up to him and I said, brother, did you really call it a disorder and not racism and Islamophobia? And he said, really tried to fob me off. The next day, we went back to the meeting, and they said, what do you think the biggest threat to the UK is? And he said, Islamic extremism. And I thought, you have compromised yourself, you've compromised your faith, and you've compromised your beliefs, because by you saying that, you've got to where you have got to, probably, by compromising you as a person. And for me, I think that's what the biggest barrier is. I sit in meetings, and, you have to conform. And if you don't conform to what the norm is, you're caused as a troublemaker. You're called a troublemaker. I've had so many people say to me, let us help you, let us rescue you. I don't need rescuing. I'm here to amplify the voices of ethnic minority communities, and I'm not going to compromise who I am. I'm not going to compromise my faith. And if it means not having that seat at the table, fair enough. I'm just not going to do it. So I think that's what the biggest barrier is for us. And I'm sorry I didn't understand the second question. But sorry, the first question.
Okay. If I got the first question correct, you're basically asking how far can you go in helping others before the organisation goes, you're doing a bit too much. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Look, the way that I would say that I've gone about any kind of thing like this in the past is you fit it within the organization's own objectives. Most organizations have EDIA strategies, right? They're basically saying we want to be more diverse. We want more communities in our spaces, especially in the sector that I'm in, museums and festivals, right? And you look around and you go, actually, nothing's really happening. And for the most part, it's a tick box exercise. Any organisation that's funded by the Arts Council of England is meant to demonstrate that kind of stuff. They're probably not doing as much as they probably could do. My challenge in that particular instance to anybody who finds themselves in that situation is, what can you do? What fits within an organizational strategy, right? Is it, for example, some easy wins that can happen? If you work in a museum, it's quite easy to contact the Ramadan Tent Project and go, hey, we'd like to host one of your iftars in this space this year. If you work in the place like a ERI, it's quite easy to go, I'm going to do an active measure to find out where the Muslim researchers are and invite some of the talented ones to come and give a speech here, right? Ask yourself, what can you do in that situation? And then wrap it up as any good worker would do within the EDIA strategy of the organization, because everything that you're supposed to do is supposed to fit within the strategy of the organization, right? And at that point, it's a difficult argument because it's within the strategic objectives of the organization. So I hope that answers the first one. The second question, I basically say, I would focus on myself. I would focus inwards and go, actually, I don't think, and I hope not, and I can literally say, you're not being hired because you're Muslim. You've been hired because you're the best at what you do, or supposedly they think that you are. So be that thing that they hired you to do. I've been hired as the CEO of Edinburgh Science to be able to take Edinburgh Science into the 21st century as a science festival. How does a science festival manifest itself in the 21st century? How does science education transform people's lives in the 21st century? Now, my Muslimness might be something that people see every day, but in terms of my day-to-day job, I have something to do and I crack on with it. And I think that's the important thing to note on that. And actually, Baroness Watson probably talked about this in more detail this morning. I'd probably take a similar position to her.
Dr. Arabi,
Thank you.
30 seconds.
Sorry.
To be brief, I certainly haven't faced any barriers in trying to help people, even examples like today or other conferences which I speak at, and no one's ever said to me you shouldn't be doing that. But on the second point, I mean, it is true in certain sectors, it will be harder for Muslims to get right to the top, and we've heard that from Baroness Watson this morning, and the field that she was in is a field where you're not promoted on the basis of talent or good character, or, it's unfortunately, politics is not like that. But there are many other sectors, the sectors that most of us work in, where it is possible to progress based on those characteristics. And as I said, based on my own experience over a few decades now in the UK, and having worked in Muslim countries as well, and visited many Muslim countries and worked with people all over the world, I would say the UK is still one of the few places in our field and in most fields where you can progress on the basis of your skills and your values and your good character. I mean, there are very few places in the world where they would select a non or a Muslim ethnic minority person to lead their national health research project, but it has been possible here. And as I said, I have worked in other countries, that wouldn't have been possible. Final thing, I know we're out of time, but whatever, I just wanted to end with two kind of reminders for all of us. I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I've had. And Allah says, whatever good you have is from Allah. So that's one thing to always remember. And the second thing is that He said, if you are grateful, I will give you more. And that's certainly something I've also seen in my career. So I hope, inshallah, that we will keep those two things in mind as we progress through our careers.
And just to round that off on a really positive note as well is, we know it's likely that risk is from Allah. So yes, we can't deny that structural racism exists. We can't deny that unconscious bias exists within the system. But, our job as Muslims is to stand on our principles and our values. And actually, I think people respect you for having a backbone. They respect you for standing confident in your identity. And for every door that is closed, 10 doors will open. And that's what the promise of Allah is actually when we stand strong in our values. So take up every opportunity that comes your way. Every new connection on LinkedIn or otherwise, and every door that opens and see where it leads. And hopefully we will be there to help you as well, because it's about sisterhood, it's about brotherhood, it's about helping us fill those spaces and create that representation for ourselves so that we can build the change that we want to see, inshallah. And so let's try and do that together. So Jazakallah khair to all of you. Thank you so much. A big round of applause.